A long, long time ago it was, before the modern generation of consoles, when imports still had to be translated and came out a year later in the West. To be exact, it was 2003, or for most of us, 2004. I'm Mmeaningless, and welcome to my review of Baten Kaitos, Eternal Wings and the Lost Ocean, the card-based RPG for the GameCube. Unlike a lot of my videos, this is much more of a review that can be viewed by someone who has not played the game, as a bit of a what is this game about, rather than you've played this game already and want to know what I thought about it. This review is not spoiler-free, but I won't talk about major plot twists or specific events beyond the general framing of the story. But first, this is a JRPG, and that means a lot of the game is spent fighting. So I'm first going to talk about what you'll be using for the majority of the playthrough. The battle system. Do you like collecting cards and deck building? Like most RPGs, battles are the biggest part of this game, and the deck building battle system is also the most unique draw about this game. So it's the first and foremost thing I have to say about it. Again, this review is not specifically about convincing you to play this game, but if you think this system is very interesting, that would be the biggest reason for playing this game, to try it yourself. If you want to hear about everything else about this game and not the battle system, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. So let me deal you in. Each character has a deck of cards, which are put in a random order and drawn into your hand at the start of battle. Every time you use a card, you draw a new one into your hand until you run out and you lose a turn of battle to shuffle your deck. Enemies also have decks and can run out of cards and shuffle if the battle goes long enough. There are four main types of cards. There are attack cards that do damage, most of which can be used by only one character, and defense cards which you use when you are attacked to defend yourself and reduce damage taken. Most defense cards can be used on multiple characters, but not everyone. Many cards can be used both to attack and defend, but are much better at one or the other. Healing and buff cards you use on yourself or your allies instead of attacking, and often have secondary effects to resist status debuffs when used as defensive items. Lastly, there's utility cards. There are a lot of cards that aren't really made for fighting, but you can combine them in different ways to create new items that may be useful in a fight, or just for 100% completion. For example, using a carving knife on a piece of wood creates a sculpture. The sculpture doesn't do anything, but it's an extra thing you can collect. Baten Kaitos is a turn-based battle system, but you still have to be paying attention all the time. During enemy turns, you can still take certain actions, and you have a time limit to start your attacks on your own turn, so you need to plan what to play fast. And ideally, get your cards lined up for combos to get the most damage possible. Combos are either matching pairs or straights. You can have several pairs or triples on a single attack, as long as every card has a match, but a straight has to stand on its own from start to end. Initially, you won't be getting huge boosts because your maximum number of plays per turn will be low, but high-level straights are extremely powerful, and you can more than double your damage output, so going for them is absolutely worth it later in the game. Like this. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get this guy destroyed. You may even want to use a healing item on an enemy in the middle of a combo if it's your only link to continue a straight. Yeah, it's out of here. 9 straight. Defense cards reduce damage taken. You can play as many defense cards as your opponent uses attacks, but this can also be a useful time to waste extra cards in your hand you don't have an immediate use for. You can also get combos on defense to reduce even more damage. There's even an extra mechanic called auras that you can use on defense to stop an enemy mid-attack, but I never successfully used one in 50 hours of playtime, and only found out how they actually worked after completing the game. And for both offense and defense, you'll want to mind the elements of your attacks. So this game has 6 elements in 3 pairs. Each element in a pair cancels out the other. The pairs are light and dark, fire and water, and wind and Chronos. No, not wind and earth. There's also a 7th non-element, physical damage, which cancels itself out. On defense, if you use a fire shield against a water attack, it completely negates the water damage of the attack. However, if you use a water shield, it will not block anything at all. On offense, you would want to use super effective moves, but sometimes this backfires because while a water enemy is weak to fire, it probably also has water defense moves that will cancel out fire attacks. It might initially seem unintuitive, but once you learn the system, it can create very interesting situations as you try to plan out how to play a battle. In addition to canceling out each other, light and dark magic also make the screen slightly brighter or darker. This is a purely visual effect with no stat changes, but it does make your pictures worse. Oh yeah, there's another mechanic. You don't get money by winning fights, but you can take pictures of enemies and sell them, and the pictures are worth more once they develop and if they are taken in good lighting conditions. There's a lot of silly things in this game. The only way to power up your characters outside of their deck is leveling up and a single equipment slot per character. The equipment is usually used for status resistances rather than raw stat boosts. But there is also class up, which doesn't improve your stats, but is a lot more of a change that lets a character hold more cards in their deck and play more cards in a single attack, which is massively important for increasing your utility and damage output. You can hypothetically finish the game at level 1 if you can abuse the game systems well enough. I wouldn't try it though. Speaking of leveling up, one more weird mechanic. You can only level up at save points, not just anywhere once out in the field. You have to use a giant flower to teleport you to a church and pray to level up and class up. This is a weird system, but once you head into a dungeon, you are going to be at the same power level throughout the whole thing, so you better prepare beforehand. Now here's some other aspects about the game that aren't related to combat, that are interesting or that you would care about if you might want to play the game. The Guardian Spirit. The player character in Baten Kaitos is the Guardian Spirit. Enter your name here. You are not the main character, Kalas. You are observing everything that goes on with Kalas and his companions and helping guide them to their goals. This is interesting from a storytelling perspective because characters will turn and talk to the camera directly to you as a character. Because you are not the protagonist, Kalas does not have amnesia like many JRPG protagonists. And since from a story perspective you can't directly control the characters, only offer advice, they can easily act in ways you don't want them to, and it builds their characterization instead of breaking immersion. You, the Guardian Spirit, have amnesia, though. You don't remember anything before the start of the game. There's gotta be some excuse for exposition of game mechanics. Card Evolution, also known as the Shampoo. If you only know this game for its 339-hour 100% speedrun, you know about Magnus Evolution. Most cards, they're called Magnus by the way, change over time, and it could be anything from plants growing and food rotting, to combining Magnus to create new ones, to complete insanity like fruit turning into an attack item called the Peach Boy, who's a little samurai guy. I'm sure there's some logic behind it, but I'd probably have to know way more about Japanese culture to understand that one. Most transformations take a few hours of real time playing the game, but some take much longer. The Shampoo has gained meme status because it takes 15 real days to turn into splendid hair, which is much, much longer than any other item, making Baten Kaitos 100% easily the longest 100% speedrun, completable without having to take breaks from playing the game. You complete everything else at a leisurely pace and then just stand in one location, leaving the game running for 2 weeks straight. But memes aside, there's some interesting situations you'll get into when you find that a card in your deck doesn't work like it used to. And there are some cards like coins or magic beans that can change form every turn of battle. There's a lot of fun combinations to find to get new, potentially very useful items. The world. At some point in the past, the world went to crap and there was a war against the gods or something. Anyway, brushing all that backstory under the rug, now everyone lives on 5 islands floating in the sky, and instead of an ocean below there's just clouds. Fish have wings now and fishermen fish in the clouds. Most animals seem to be combinations of other animals, like pows, pigs with cow udders. Also people have also gained wings. Most of the time these wings are not visible. Across the 5 islands, the settings of the game range from generic to extremely creative. Yeah, there's a lava cave and a jungle, and a big old tree that seems to show up in a lot of JRPGs. But there's also bridges made out of clouds, and basically everything on the island of Mira, like fractured screens and walking on ceilings, and this assault on the senses. Despite everyone in the world having wings, they don't use them very often. Once, early in the game, you miss a departing ship by just a hair, so Kalos just flies up onto it anyway. Yet there are many obstacles and problems that really could have been probably solved by flight that just aren't. Like the writers had a few good ideas for situations, but were unsure how to actually incorporate flight convincingly into the world. I felt the same about the High Intia and Xenoblade Chronicles, who also have wings and can allegedly fly but basically never do. Monolithsoft made both games, and there are many other similarities I could pick out between them, but most would be spoilers for at least one of the games. It's a fantasy world though, so I didn't really think too hard about it making sense. One other thing about this game that some people consider notable is that it is fully voice acted. That is pretty unusual for a game of this time, and is probably the reason why this game takes up 2 discs instead of just 1. However, what's notable about the voice acting is also that it is very bad. Clearly, there was not a huge amount of budget for the English translation of this game, so it's impressive that they have voices at all. But at the same time, I really do not like the voices of a couple of characters.
It's unthinkable to act against the Empire!
I don't know how the Japanese version of this game sounds, but the English version is not the most amazing performances. Music. Did you know that this game has music? Did you know that I forgot to include anything about music in the first draft of this script? There are some good catchy tracks in this soundtrack, especially the battle themes. Not every track is great, but a lot of them are good. It's not the greatest soundtrack I've ever heard, but it's far more than passable, and I did not find any of the music annoying, which matters a lot for a long game where you'll hear every track many times. The music is also good in an audio quality way. It was not compressed a painfully noticeable amount like most of the voice acting lines were. So overall, a good soundtrack would listen to independent of the game. Now, the actual story. I don't want to say too much beyond giving a general idea because the story has a lot of twists and turns. You start out trying to collect 5 magic cards that are pieces of a dead god before the Empire can do the same thing. Yes, Emperor Geldablame basically wants to summon Exodia. As the game is multiple discs long, clearly you won't just get all the cards and win. This game is a JRPG. I don't feel that it's a spoiler to say that at some point in the game, you get your own ship and the ability to travel to any island you want, like visiting those obvious blank spaces on the map that probably have something important beyond the main 5 islands, or that there's, again, a lot of twists and turns along the way. The characters are often the best part of the story, as basically everyone in the story is concealing something about their motives or history, and they aren't just on an adventure to save the world. Kalos, the main character, is interesting because his main goal from before the start of the game is revenge on Giacomo, the man who killed his grandfather. Giacomo just happens to be working for the main bad guys, so that goal and saving the world go hand in hand. Jella actually wants to save the world, as do the other characters somewhat, because summoning an ancient evil god is generally considered to be a bad thing. Liud, Savina, Gubari, and Mizuti all have some extra story arcs to add as well. One of these characters I felt was a lot weaker than all the others, and they mostly just tag along without being nearly as interesting, but I'll let you find out who that is yourself and form your own opinion on them. One interesting note about the game is that it has a disabled protagonist. Sort of. Kalos only has one natural wing and a prosthetic winglet. He was bullied for this as a child, and it is a major part of his insecurities as an adult. But at the same time, no one seems to really judge him for it in the present. And as characters' wings are generally only used or even visible in battle, you don't even really see it that often. And despite what I said earlier about everyone in the world having wings, some other characters don't have any wings. Mizuti just floats. Savina's wings look like male peacock feathers, and she never shows the ability to fly. And then Liud and most of the other Imperials don't have wings at all for reasons that aren't really explored. It's interesting to have a physically deformed hero, but I would not call it a huge step in representation or anything because, in the end, it really didn't matter much. It's an interesting note, but not much more than that. Player decisions. Your only meaningful decisions are in deck building. There are no alternate story paths, and rarely can you even choose what destination to go to first. This game's story is JRPG to the core. Very linear. Sometimes you can actually explore yourself and find an impassable obstacle you won't get past until later, But usually you have to follow a very deliberate story progression, even in the few occasions where you really should be able to do things in a different order. Like not being able to buy a quest item from an NPC before you find the specific need for the item. This is the biggest negative about the game. It's a bit more narratively forgivable since you are only aiding the protagonist. You, the player, generally wouldn't be making plot decisions anyway. But if you don't like linear stories, this game is not going to suddenly make you love linear stories. Instead, you will just be very frustrated. Speaking of the arbitrary lack of exploration, here's some other gripes about the game, because there's certainly some other problems as well. The game sometimes just feels like it doesn't respect your time as a player. There are some areas you have to keep going back to after story events that take forever to leave. The chief offender being the throne room on Mmeaningless. The clip playing behind the statement right now is how long it takes to get anywhere from this stupid screen. It's a very useless long walk. Even worse is Giacomo. He's the guy Kaitos wants to kill, so you fight him several times, and each fight feels like an obnoxious endurance battle. Now this clip playing here is just a single turn of a fight with him. You have to wait out 4 attacks for what feels like several minutes. I hate this boss. Giacomo also loves pulling the RPG villain classic of losing in a battle and immediately winning in the cutscene right after. Now here's a gripe about the battle screen. Character hit points are not usually visible. You can only see your health and cards remaining for every character at the start of each character's turn, when you're on a timer, not during the round results screen or during attacks. So sometimes you're really flying blind trying to plan your next turns. If this game had been on a dual screen system like the DS or Wii U, there would have been a lot more room for important information on the second screen. By the time Xenoblade came out, it seems like Monolithsoft corrected too much in the other direction by having information just vomited all over the screen during battle, creating an interface with too much going on. To wrap this up, I liked Baten Kaitos for its unique qualities, but it's sure not perfect. Monolithsoft would go on to create much more amazing games like the first Xenoblade Chronicles, but Baten Kaitos is a very interesting entry in JRPG history. Speaking of Xenoblade, I have a review series of Xenoblade 2 coming up at some point, but I wanted to get this out before it, as I played Baten Kaitos first. The Xenoblade 2 review will be much more like my other review videos to this point, going through a story part by part and analyzing it, rather than going through a holistic end view of the game. If you think the battle system for Baten Kaitos looks good, that again is the reason to play it. Other people have far more praise for the story than I do, and it's not a bad story, much as I didn't focus on it. If I had to give Baten Kaitos an overall numerical rating, probably a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching.
Give me a break. Is that the best you can do? This! Too late to say you're sorry. Sword style. Energy wave! This! Didn't hurt things! Didn't hurt ya! Didn't hurt things!